KOWS 107.3 FM, Occidental, California. On the telephone from Oxford in the United Kingdom, we have Professor Peter Atkins. Good evening.
Good evening or good morning, whichever you prefer.
Good morning will do. Good evening. It doesn't really matter much to me. Very grateful to have you on our little radio show here. I'll take a stab at a legitimate introduction. Peter William Atkins is a prominent chemist who has become one of our finest science writers, bridging the large gap between the genius of science and the relative ignorance of the general public, and doing it with wit and grace and style, and above all, effectiveness. Professor Atkins is the author of some of the world's most valuable and used textbooks in the discipline of chemistry, and has become a writer on the order of being recommended quite seriously by Richard Dawkins as a candidate for a Nobel Prize in Literature. Such a fine writer is he. Such a fine writer is Peter Atkins. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Professor Atkins, you're retired from teaching?
Well, yes, I'm retired from being paid. And I go on trying to teach through books, of course. Of
course, absolutely. You have been described as one of the great communicators in chemistry, and some of your books have been described as some of the most beautiful chemistry books ever written. The book I'm familiar with, I wish I was in possession of your newest book, but I'm not. But the book that I've been spending time with is called Galileo's Finger: The 10 Great Ideas of Science.
Yes.
Professor, if what I would like to do with you, we have the better part of an hour, if all goes well, is that I would like to orient ourselves toward our listeners. I am certainly nowhere near competent to engage you in any kind of intelligent discussion about chemistry, but I can serve as a host and invite you to perhaps give us a good chemistry education in the better part of an hour, if you would be agreeable to that.
Right, I'll do that.
All right. Well, let's start with kindergarten. Let's start at the beginning. What is a chemical?
It's anything that you can touch. I mean, the whole world is made up of compounds and elements. And compounds are just a combination of elements, and the elements are things like iron and hydrogen and carbon that, on a simple view, can't be broken down any further. So, and there's just over 100 of them. And it's one of the great discoveries of mankind, really, is that everything there is, every type of matter that there is just built up from these elements. You're built up from it. I'm built up from it. Houses are built from it. Metal is built from it. Everything. Mm-hmm. So the world is really these 100 elements joined together in different ways.
Are chemicals and elements synonymous?
Well, elements are chemicals, but chemicals can also be the compounds of those elements. So water, for example, is a chemical,
right,
and is a combination of hydrogen and oxygen.
Right. And there are elements that have yet to be discovered?
Well, we've got to about 112 at the moment. When I learned chemistry, it was 92, so it's increasing at the rate of one every 2 or 3 years. There's thought to be really no end to the elements that can be discovered, but as you get into the very heavy elements, the most recent ones, they live for only sort of microseconds or even less. So they're unimportant, really.
Mm-hmm. So there's nothing in the manifest cosmos that's not an element or a chemical?
There's radiation, but all the matter that there is one of these elements or a mixture of them.
Mm-hmm. Are the sciences nested in a hierarchy?
Yeah, but it depends what you've been brought up in to decide which is the most important. I mean, the normal hierarchy is to think of biology, and beneath that is chemistry, and beneath that is physics. So all chemistry is understood in terms of physical principles, and biology is understood in terms of the chemicals that make up organisms.
Mm-hmm. The state of science these days, science is to be found in universities and in industry, mostly, yes?
Yes, but science is everywhere. Science is really a way of understanding the world and of finding out the way that it works and how it's made up. So if you want to understand the world, you just have to do science.
Has the industrial world corrupted science to any significant degree?
Depends who you speak to. I mean, I'm sure that as soon as money is involved, then corruption is never far behind. But academic science is really a very pure kind of science, with tiny exceptions here and there, where the occasional fraud and so on. But it's in science. Well, science polices itself very thoroughly, and if someone is deceitful in science, it doesn't take long before it's found out. So it's a very pure kind of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if more people behaved like scientists, the world would really be a much happier place.
Right. Let me see. I'm fumbling through some of my notes here. Forgive me for a moment. Gee whiz. I'm fumbling around here. God help me. Your new book is called On Being, A Scientist's Exploration of the Great Questions of Existence.
Yes.
This is a book that I have not been able to get my hands on. I wonder if you would speak about it, please.
Yes, certainly. I think science is such a wonderful way of understanding the world that it helps us to understand the questions that have troubled people for all time, really. It illuminates the world. So questions like where did it all come from? What is the nature of the biosphere? Where is it all going? What is the purpose of the world? Why does anything happen? Those sort of big questions that really people have wondered about. And for thousands of years, they've shown their interest in these questions by building myths. The myths have been very entertaining and rather delightful, but they were just gropings for understanding. What science has done, in my view, and what I wanted to share with my audience, was the fact that it's beginning to give truthful, reliable answers to these deeply wonderful questions.
Deeply what questions?
Wonderful questions.
Yes. For example?
Where did it all come from?
Yes, that's a good one.
Everyone, given the moment's thought, wonders about where it all came from.
Yeah.
We've all done that in our life. And science, there are great myths that have pervaded the literature. The holy books are built on it. Every society throughout the world has its creation myths and so on, which shows the importance of the question. But science is, although it can't answer it yet, is edging towards being able to answer
Yes, I was flustered a moment ago because I had a book of yours called Creation Revisited, and
Yeah.
I had some delicious little sentences underlined that I neglected to bring to the studio about how everything can be understood, and when we peel away the fog around these things, they stand revealed in their pristine simplicity, things like that.
That's right. And to understand doesn't mean to take away wonder. The world is a wonderful place, but you can get deeper joy, I think, from looking at it with an understanding eye. So, it's like music, really, that you can certainly listen to a piece of classical music without knowing the structure of it and get great delight from it, but if you know the structure of the music that you're listening to, then you get deeper delight. That's true of the world and science too. So you go out into a forest and you see the wonderful colours and you smell the wonderful fragrances, and you see the trees and you see the undergrowth and you see the light driving the growth of the forest. That's all very wonderful just to look at, but with your inner eye, provided by science, you get a deeper delight.
Yes.
So science provides understanding, and that, in my view, adds to wonder.
Yes, you refer to the quantification of beauty.
Yes. Well, I think there's it depends what you mean by beauty, really. One definition of beauty, I think, is simplicity. So that if you look at something which is simply crafted and has clean flowing lines, then that is a form of beauty. Mm-hmm. And you can look at a mathematical equation which may be very simple and have the analogue of clean flowing lines, and that is very beautiful as well. So I think simple ideas which have consequences of enormous complexity really are beautiful ideas.
Yes, and symmetry or simplicity or beauty is a sign of robust health.
Yes, I think that may be the case. I think we scientists are hewers of simplicity out of complexity. So we see a complex scene, but we hack away at it with all the instruments that we have at our disposal and all the theories, and we arrive at a core which is extremely simple. And the delight is knowing that from that very simple core, the very complex has arisen.
Yes, you suggest that we're poised to answer some of our most profound and fundamental questions.
If they're real questions.
For example, you say, where did we come from? Now,
yes.
This is something that probably everyone has contemplated at some length.
You bet.
And differing degrees of depth, and
yep.
it seems to always come out that there are certain questions like where did we come from that we're not equipped to ever know.
Oh well, you see, you're speaking like a philosopher now. In my view, philosophers are pessimists. they say things like you just said, that we'll never know. Don't bother to try to find out. But we scientists, and I hope every scientist, is an optimist. And we set about trying to understand the universe in the expectation that we'll arrive at understanding. Now, it may well be that our brains just aren't big enough to understand the answers to these very deep questions. Maybe that we'll actually never know the answers to some of them. But don't let's start out by expecting not to understand. Let's be optimistic and drive forward. After all, look at the progress that science has made well, in the last 300 years. It's been quite extraordinary, and it's still making amazing progress. And there's no reason at this stage to think that it will fizzle out.
Right. Our knowledge and understanding continues to compound.
Absolutely. I mean, knowledge is built on the shoulders of giants, really. Mm-hmm. And we have in every generation a giant of a scientist who stands and sees even further out than before.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a sense that we might be on the cusp of a golden age?
Well, what a difficult question. No, I don't have a sense of that. I have because I'm not quite sure what it means, but I do think that science is providing hope for detailed understanding of everything. And it's wonderful to be alive while it's doing that. I'd really like to have a look at science in 100 years' time or 500 years' time to see where it got to. But I just have to be optimistic that it is going to resolve questions that trouble mankind.
Yes, we had a guest on the show just 2 weeks ago, David Deutsch.
Yes.
Who's published a new book called The Beginning of Infinity.
Yes.
And I wonder if you have taken a look at it.
No, I haven't.
I see. Okay. You confess, I think, in your writing somewhere, to your own limitations, and that, of course, is suggested in the kind of wistful desire to be able to see into the future 100, 500 years, to see how we're doing, or how much more knowledge we've penetrated, or how much more of the mystery we have penetrated. Are you satisfied with your life's work, or do you still have ambitions that burn?
Well, there's almost two questions there. I think, take the first one, am I satisfied with my life's work? I think being a writer of textbooks is really a bit second-rate, really. I really would have liked to have been, as I thought I might have been once when I was starting out on my career, a real scientist discovering wonderful new things. Instead of that, I've just become, if you like, just a reporter. So, putting it another way, I think instead of discovering new things, what I've tried to do is to help young minds get to the stage where they might have the opportunity to discover new things. So the people that I've inspired through my textbooks will be the people who will go on as a kind of surrogate me, trying to understand and discover wonderful things. So I'm disappointed there. I think I would have preferred to have been a great scientist discovering relativity, discovering quantum mechanics and whatever's going to come next. But life has run its course, and so I like writing. And my ambition is to go on communicating and science to people. I think there are two aspects of it. One is I like to think that I ignite a fire with a textbook so that you encourage students and readers to take the subject further. And through my books to the general public, I like to think that I spread the fire. Maybe talking to people in California, this isn't a good analogy, but I think you probably get the idea. Mm-hmm. So it's a matter of igniting the fire in young minds to make them enthusiastic and knowledgeable about science, and then to spread our understanding to the world at large. Because the progress of science depends upon the general population being willing to tolerate it and support it financially.
Mm-hmm. Do you hear from people who have been ignited by your textbooks?
Oh, yeah, very much so. There's two kinds of pleasure. One is that wherever I go in the world, and I do travel around quite extensively, wherever I land in the world, there are people whose brains I've touched through their using of my textbooks in all sorts of countries, not just the English-speaking world, but through translations into Japan, Korea, Malaysia, Greece, Israel, Arabia, everywhere really, and that's a real pleasure. But also, it's a pleasure to get letters from users who thank me. And that's always a delight, and I do try, if they come from students, to write back and go on encouraging them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, writing is it's a very lonely experience. If you are an actor on a stage, then you play your part and you get immediate applause. But if you're a writer, you write for years, and then maybe some years later the applause comes. So you have to hope that the applause will come one day.
Right, if then.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, this is the type of undertaking that it's in a sense a thankless task, and one can only hope and imagine that your work has enormous effects down the road.
Yes, I think to pick up on that, it's not really a thankless task. It's certainly a task that gives me great pleasure, because certainly if you go back to Galileo's Finger, the book that you mentioned some time back, where the 10 chapters in it talk about what I regard as the great ideas of science, like relativity and quantum mechanics and evolution and natural selection and so on. In order to write the chapters, I had to learn a great deal. And learning, I find, is a deep pleasure. To end the day knowing a bit more than you did at breakfast seems to me to be a good way of rounding out a day's existence.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you refer to the summit of understanding, where we will experience the deep joy of illumination that science alone provides.
Yes.
It's lovely. Clearly, you enjoy writing because it comes through in every paragraph. It's always a delight to read someone who himself or herself takes such delight in the charms of effective communication.
Yes.
There's a phrase that I saw here. It said, "Science might be semi-infinite."
Yes.
What on earth does that mean?
Yeah. Well, think of digging down into understanding, getting more and more fundamental theories. I think in the end we will reach bedrock. We will get to the point where we can say, right, we understand the fundamental structure of the universe. But looking at it from the other direction, the applications of science, I think those are without bound. Those are infinite. So what I had in mind is saying, going down in understanding, you end at a point, and that completes understanding. But going in the opposite direction, it's infinite. So it's semi-infinite. It's not infinite in both directions. I mean, a philosopher would probably say it's infinite in both directions. There will never be an end to our disentangling the fundamentals of the universe. But being an optimist, I like to think that there is bedrock down there that one day we will encounter.
Professor Atkins, reading through your biography, you went to work as a 15-year-old in the real world.
You bet.
Could you tell us? Could you speak to us a bit about your boyhood?
Oh, what an embarrassing question.
Thank you.
My boyhood, from up to about 15, you mean? Or
Yes,
beyond?
yes.
Yeah. Well, I just had a very normal background. I was an only child, so I suppose that helped to make me an introvert, and that might help me make me a scientist. My parents were not in the least educated. My father was bright, but having been born at the beginning of the 20th century, opportunities for that brightness being cultivated were minimal. So he left school early, and then his career was interrupted by the Second World War. And so he never had the education that I happily was able to acquire. And so I don't know. I thought once when I was about 10, then I would be an electrician. And in a way, I suppose that's what happened, because chemistry is all about what happens to electrons. But I thought it would be, at that time, to be electrons running through wires. But as it turned out, my electrons were just running around inside atoms and molecules.
Right, free-range electrons.
Yeah, quite. And then
Professor Atkins,
yes.
What do you suppose intrigued you about electricity?
That you could make things work through it, I suppose. Electricity is amazing stuff. Think of the modern world, and the fact that just driving electrons from one place to another really accounts for just about all our technology. And I suppose subconsciously I was grasping that idea as a young child. So it was a way. It was a funny sort of way of getting mastery over the world, that you could do things with electricity. Yeah, and so then I suppose you wanted to know what electricity was, and that opened doors to deeper understanding.
Right. Does the name Amory Lovins ring a bell to you?
Very distantly. Fill that in for me.
I don't know what to say. He's involved with something called the Rocky Mountain Institute. He's quite a brilliant man. I heard him speak yesterday at at a conference called Bioneers in California, and he is. I wish I could be more articulate about who he is, but he gave the most riveting presentation about electricity, about how we are on the verge of discovering or being able to generate enormous amounts of electricity through relatively inexpensive and safe and clean
let's hope so.
sources. Honestly, I wish I'm just not sufficiently. I wish I could be more articulate here.
Yeah.
But he has a new book called Reinventing Fire.
Right.
And at the risk of being presumptuous, I highly urge you to get a hold of this book, Reinventing Fire, because I think I found his presentation absolutely thrilling.
Right. Well, I'll certainly look out for that. But it's electricity is really a branch of science. And if you were to strip away electricity from the world, look where we'd be. We'd be back in almost the early 19th century.
Yes.
Yes. None of the comforts and delights of the modern world.
Right. So you went to work in the real world at 15.
Yeah.
And then you re-entered academia.
I was encouraged by my very enlightened bosses. I worked for Monsanto as a lab assistant, just doing menial things. But I've always been very thankful to them that they could see that maybe I was wasting my time. Perhaps they thought I was wasting their time, but as it turns out, I think they really thought that I was wasting my time just being at that level. And so they encouraged me to struggle to try to get back into academic life, to go to college.
Mm-hmm. Are you working with a writing project now?
I never stop.
Yeah.
Yeah, the textbooks really are my lifeblood, really. I think of them as the textbook. Do you know the dish beef Wellington? Yeah, which a slab of beef done up in pastry, and I think of the textbooks as beef Wellington, and every so often you need a sorbet, and so the sorbets are the books for the general public. Much cleaner on the palate, really, as far as writing is concerned. But at the moment I'm working on 4 textbooks.
My.
Well, it's better than some years. I mean, textbooks are on a very strict sequence that they have to come out for publishing reasons every, say, 4 years, sometimes 3 years.
Yes.
And so if you've got several major textbooks which are still alive, then each of them is on a 3 or 4 year cycle, and it's a bit like biorhythms, really. Sometimes they all come into phase at the same time.
Right.
So 2 years ago, I was working on 7 books simultaneously.
Oh dear.
So in a way, it's a vacation this year with only 4.
Right. When you had 7, were you difficult to be around?
You'd have to ask other people that.
Okay. So the textbooks, do they need much revision, or just a little haircut here and there?
I always rewrite almost from scratch each one, just to keep them looking young and stopping them looking middle-aged. So every revision is a deep cut, not just a trim.
Yes.
And it depends on the subject, really, how much new information is forthcoming. If I were writing books on molecular biology, which is a subject that is really galloping forward, then every new edition, every 3 or 4 years, would be almost have to be rewritten. Physical chemistry, which is my principal subject, the principles are well established, applications are evolving, so it's more a matter of refining the presentation each time than putting in new material.
I'm guessing you keep up with all the journals?
Well, when you say all the journals, I certainly don't do that, but I certainly keep up with review articles and so on. And a lot, because the book is so widely dispersed through the world, many people do write to me with advice on what to include. And whenever we plan a new edition, of course, we do a great deal of market research, and that's invaluable in terms of getting advice from people.
Right. Is there are there chemists working today who you particularly admire, who might be doing cutting edge work that has your attention?
Well, some people might say that chemistry is a kind of 20th century subject and it's not really developing at the moment. That could not be more wrong. I mean, amazing advances are taking place in chemistry. For example, the whole world of nanotechnology, where molecule-sized machines are starting to be built, it is really an aspect of chemistry. What the 20th century did, if I can put it this way, is to let me start that sentence again. Starting it slightly surprisingly, think of Michelangelo, and think of Michelangelo carving the Pietà, which is now in St. Peter's in Rome. He was showing that he had skills and acquiring skills, and then once he'd done that, he then got down to the business of doing amazing, creative, seemingly unfinished, but actually wonderfully creative sculptures and so on. And I think 20th century chemistry is a bit like that. People were acquiring talent. They were acquiring the skills to be able to move atoms into particular arrangements. They were learning how to be architects on a molecular scale. And now they're putting that to use. They're building extraordinarily complex arrangements of molecules, which are the equivalent of cathedrals on an atomic scale, which are providing the infrastructure for modern technology, and not to mention modern medicine as well. So chemists are really finding ways of building matter that might not exist anywhere else in the universe, and which could provide the springboard for new technological advance.
Right.
It really is a very vibrant subject.
Right. Is there any particular generational genius out there?
What do you mean by that?
I mean, well, earlier in the conversation you spoke about that we stand on the shoulders of giants.
Oh, I see what you mean, yeah.
Is there a giant working today?
Yes, but it would be invidious to mention them. I'd lose too many friends.
Sure.
But I mean, I go regularly to the meetings of the American Chemical Society, and this one was in Denver about a month ago. And you simply have to wander around the lecture rooms, seeing the extraordinary progress that's being made and the quite undreamt of molecules that are being made. It's a very, very exciting time.
I circled a phrase, the globalization of reality. What does that imply?
Oh, what did I say there? I can't remember where I said that. It sounds pretty good.
Well, I didn't scribble down where I found it. It does sound good. We don't need to linger another moment there. Professor Atkins, let's imagine that there are serious, passionate chemists who tune into this, who punch up this conversation, looking forward to visiting with you. Is there anything that you might address them directly in terms of anything that you might feel worthwhile? I'm fumbling again.
Yeah, I can see what you're fumbling towards. It's got to take a message and encouragement, isn't there, for them. I think if they're young students of chemistry, then they should take delight from the fact that they've chosen to study chemistry, because chemistry is very much a central science, and from the vantage point that they are acquiring through their studies, they can look out in a multitude of different directions. They can look out into biology, because modern biology is so firmly based in chemistry through molecular biology. So as a chemist, they can look into biology and take inspiration from it and acquire understanding. Because the principles of chemistry are founded in physics, they also can look into physics and see the laws of physics and how they rule the world, and that really deepens their understanding of the subject. And I suppose they can look out into medicine and they can see that they're helping humanity by prolonging life and helping us to die in a more comfortable, easy way. And I think also they can, looking through physics, they'll see mathematics lurking behind it, and they will realize that mathematics is an extraordinary mapping of reality onto symbols, and they should take joy from that. A friend of mine who died recently, from California, in fact, wrote a book on mathematics, and to encourage people to study mathematics, he had a little anecdote about someone saying that stop and listen, and if you listen carefully, you will hear doors closing. And the doors were closing because people weren't studying mathematics. If you study mathematics, doors open for you, and you see great vistas of science, and you can understand it. And one of the ways that science progresses is that scientists make enormous imaginative leaps, and they come up with ideas. But in order to test those ideas, they've got to render them quantitative. They've got to turn them into equations so that they can turn the handle on the equation and ring out numbers, and then see whether those numbers match what they observe on the lab bench. So a young scientist has got to learn how to take qualitative, imaginative ideas and turn them into something quantitative. And there's a great skill in that, and it's mathematics that lies behind it. So I suppose my take-home message below all that is pay attention to mathematics and don't let it get the better of you. Get the better of mathematics.
Right. So this is a way of grounding our high-flying imagination.
Well, grounding is a little bit too pessimistic a term. Yes.
There I go again.
Yes, exactly. I don't want this imagination in flight to be brought down to earth,
like shooting skeet.
Being shot down.
Uh-huh.
No, I want people to realize that the mathematics can be a motive power for discovery. That's very, very important. But in the sense that you meant it, I mean, letting imaginative ideas be confronted with reality to see whether they are real or not, that's dead right. You need mathematics.
That's
one of the differences, of course, between being an artist and a scientist. Artistry is all about imagination, and it can be completely divorced from reality, whereas science is imagination in alliance with reality.
Yes. Well, science certainly can be apprehended as high art.
Oh, no? Well, I won't go along with you entirely there, certainly, because certainly it's science is an extraordinary human achievement, just as high art is an extraordinary human achievement. But art can fly free of reality, whereas science must be grounded in it. I'm using the term grounded now.
But there's an aesthetic to intelligence, to great intelligence.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That's what
yes.
I meant by art.
Yes.
I just meant the aesthetic of brilliance,
yes.
of
Yes,
genius.
Absolutely. And I think if people were to regard science as, not perhaps as high art, but as high culture,
Okay.
then I think they would
Yes.
realize that giving up on science is like giving up on culture.
Mm-hmm.
They should not do it.
Mm-hmm. Professor Atkins, how do you see our species, our humble species? I tend to think that the human is quite a magnificent species.
Yes, I think it's an extraordinary species, and it's quite amazing, really, that through our evolutionary history, where our brains developed to survive in jungles, that we're actually able, using those same brains, to do science. It is quite an amazing achievement of a human brain. But I think that humanity is a wonderful species in principle. Of course, there are exceptions to it, and we can easily think of those. But the fact that we animals can look around and comprehend is, to me, quite extraordinary. Mm-hmm. The fact that we've stumbled on a way of understanding. I mean, the scientific method is a pretty straightforward method, really. It's really not just thinking about what the world should be like, but going out and seeing what it's like, doing tests to verify your expectations and so on. Mm-hmm. And that's a pretty obvious thing to do. And it's amazing that it took so long, really, until the 15th, 16th centuries to stumble upon that mm-hmm. technique for understanding. Mm-hmm. But my goodness, we're taking it forward at great pace at the moment.
Right. Better late than never.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank goodness that you and I are here while it's in full flight.
Really?
Yeah.
As a chemist, were you ever drawn to the kitchen? Have you done any cooking?
I've done cooking just for survival's sake.
Right.
It's certainly one of my books, the first edition of which was called Molecules, mm-hmm. and the second edition is called, rather arrogantly, wasn't my choice, Atkins is Molecules. Right. What I tried to do is to imagine sitting at a dinner table with food and wine and everything in front of me, and the linen of the cloth and the napkins and so on, and to look at everything much more closely to see what the molecules were that were responsible for the flavors, the tastes, the fragrances, the colors, the textures, and I learned a lot writing that book.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's the point of writing books, really, is to learn oneself.
Mm-hmm. See what comes out.
Well, put it another way, what needs to come in order to come out? Because I certainly don't know everything. And if I settle down to write a book, and I've got to imbibe a lot of knowledge first, and then it sort of gets cooked inside me, and then a book comes out.
Right. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on and talking to us. I've been fairly intimidated, imagining being able to hold up my end with a man of your accomplishment and stature. I'm satisfied that I did all right.
You did pretty well.
And I'm really thrilled that we've been able to visit with you, and that our listeners will have the opportunity to listen to you as well. So
it's a real pleasure.
Thank you so much, and be well.
Thank you very much indeed. Goodbye.
From Oxford, England, Peter W. Atkins. And boy, that's the truth. I'm a nervous wreck sometimes talking to some of these people. I can pinch myself. I can hardly believe that I have the opportunity and the responsibility to try to conduct a decent interview with these extraordinary persons who occasionally we catch in the web here. Anyway, Peter W. Atkins, one of the great communicators of science and in particular chemistry. His textbooks, particularly a book called Physical Chemistry, are published and read by all over the world and have been for probably several decades. This is a man of great accomplishment. And, anyone who's interested can find him and his books. And they read wonderfully. They're absolutely a pure pleasure to read. There's no end of charm and humor and the most penetrating sort of intelligence that reaches us. And whether we have an affinity for this type of subject or not, it's always a deep, deep pleasure to engage with someone packing this kind of intelligence, this kind of marvelous, marvelous intelligence. It speaks to the very best of our